Hey everybody, it's Sally Hendrick with Shout Your Cause. I've got Lori Grant here, and somebody's listening to it somewhere. It's echoing. And I've got Lisa Franklin with me, and we are getting ready to talk about White Fragility, chapters 5 and 6. And I do hear an echo. I don't know if you guys, is there a window open showing Facebook?
Yeah, so
Uh-oh, there goes Lori. Okay, it must have been her. All right, how are you doing, Lisa?
I'm great. How about you, Sally?
I'm good. I'm going to look at the Shout Your Cause page to make sure that we're actually live. Yes, we are live. And I just want to make sure it's popping up. Yeah. You guys, is there a window? Okay, there we go. All right, so it always takes a minute or two to get the technology going. There's Lauren. Hey, Lauren, how you doing? She says hello. Sorry you can't be here with us today. I know that you listened to the book. So, good, great. She can see and hear us. Okay, so, yes, Elaine, I did send the link. It is in the Shout Your Cause group. If you'll go look in that group, it should be very, very close to the top. Go look in there. Awesome. And we'll have Elaine on here. And there's another girl named Michelle that might come. I'm not sure. All right. So here comes Lori again. Let's get her up here. Hey there. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay.
Better?
All right. So, okay. All right. That's me echoing in the background.
That's you, not me.
It's you. But I'm not online. I'm not like on Facebook anywhere. Nope. I don't know. Okay. Well, we might have an echo from time to time. Okay. All right. So anyway, let's get into chapter 5 and 6 a little bit. We already had a couple of meetings where we went through, chapters 1 and 2, and then we did 3 and 4. And so now we're at 5 and 6. I've looked at the schedule of the rest of the chapters, and just for housekeeping's sake, I think what we'll do is 4 chapters next time because they're all about 16 minutes each. So that gives us about an hour of listening time or about the same amount of reading time. And then the final one will be the final 2 chapters, which are a little bit shorter together, but then there was like an end notes kind of chapter that has, like another 11-minute thing. So we'll be able to wrap this up in 2 more times. So that'll be cool. So we've had lots of great discussion so far, and I wanted to just give an overview of what chapters 5 and 6 are about before we get into the discussion. And chapter 5 is all about this good or bad binary situation. If you talk about anything that has to do with racism or race, here comes Elaine. Hold on. Hey, Elaine.
Hey.
So we're talking about chapter 5, talking about the good bad binary. So we're talking about chapter 5. Do you hear that? That echo? So the chapter 5 basically means if you're talking about racism, people are saying it's either a good conversation or bad. Like you choose to say that if somebody does anything that has any racial tendencies to it at all, they're considered a bad person, and people will reflect against that and then shut down the conversation and not move forward with it to actually investigate and find out if something is actually worth talking about. From an objective viewpoint, people will get immediately defensive and take things personally and say, well, if I'm good, I'm not racist. Or if I do anything racist, then that means I'm bad. And so they automatically defend themselves. So that's like that whole 5th chapter. And then they also she also mentioned some things about color blindness and color celebration. And we can go into more of that in a few minutes. And then when you get into chapter 6, the topic is basically anti-Blackness, and then there's a little bit touched on about affirmative action. So I wanted to, and then there was a good piece at the end, a discussion around the movie The Blind Side. So I want to make sure that we get into that discussion as well. Okay, so anything that you guys want to mention on the good binary? Any kind of examples you want to bring up?
I was just going to offer that I thought that this was such a great standalone chapter that explained just I've had encounters before where I didn't know to call it that when having discussions with others, and this good bad binary was just really good.
I tell you what, you know what I'm going to do? If you're not talking, I'm going to mute your microphone. And if you are talking, just unmute it. Do you know how to do that, ladies? Okay. All right. Just in case, because I think this echoing is somehow, I'm not sure what to do about it. All right. So, yes, it is a good standalone chapter. She did go back and like pick up on some things that have been talked about previously in the book as well. Basically, I wrote down some things that say you could not be racist and good at the same time. This is the sentiment that came about after civil rights. So she also went into racists were always perceived as Southern racist or mean people or old people or uneducated white people. Racist equals bad, prejudiced or mean, and non-racist equals good, educated, open mind, or northern, which is, pretty funny seeing how things tend to play out around the world, around the country, in all different ways. And whenever we don't want to go into this conversation and we deflect from it and are afraid to get in and talk about it and maybe try to see what things we are doing in our conversations and in our lives and in our thoughts, if we deflect that and don't acknowledge that some of the things we may be doing are things that are just inherent in our personalities or in how we grew up or what we were taught or what we saw growing up, then we're deflecting it and not able to actually change that behavior. So they call it white defensiveness. And I have to say that I'm sure that I've done that in my life at some point. I don't see why I wouldn't have. What about you ladies?
Yeah, I think that's like the whole concept of white fragility, right? Is that we deem it awful. We don't look at the little ways that we all do. We all carry that racism, right? We don't look at that we benefit from being white. We don't look at the concepts of the nice neighborhood, the good schools, all those things, all those phrases that are actually racist, but we don't think of it like that because we're not using those terms. You know what I mean? We're not using like, I don't want my kids to go to a school with a lot of black kids. We don't say that. We say, I want my kid to go to a good school. But the code of that is a white school.
Mm-hmm.
So hearing, I think, I'm going to be teaching this at my church starting next month. And I think one of the biggest things is I think this chapter should be the first chapter in the book. And I know that it's touched on a lot in the introduction and in the first chapter, but I think if we can start to like own it without thinking of ourselves as bad, then we can start to accept when somebody calls us out.
Yeah.
Because now we're not evil, horrible human beings. We're programmed human beings, I mean, and we really are. I mean, we've had 400 years of programming. And so to think that we're going to figure it out and, if we've been active in social justice for, let's say, 10 years, if you think you're going to figure it out, 400 years of it, and everything in our system is set up this way, I think that like understanding that it doesn't make you bad because you slip, because you still have those unconscious biases, it's bringing it to your attention. So when somebody says something, you don't go, "You're out of your mind, I'm not racist." You can say, "Oh, I can see how you could feel that way." And that's it. It doesn't have to be like, "I'm evil, you're evil for telling me." And it is hard. Like, it's hard to get called out because our gut says that means I'm bad. And we've all done it. I moved my mother last year, and I remember very distinctly going, "I don't want to move her to that community." That community was very, very mixed. And I was like, I'd rather have her in the next town over. It's mixed, but it's not as mixed as that community. And I didn't say that. I just said, I think this community is a little safer.
I wrote down one of the statistics that she had quoted in the book about this, and it was something like, as soon as a neighborhood reaches around 7% Black, there starts to create this white flight situation at 7%. And then there's an overarching thought that if a community is over 30%, then it's not considered safe. Same thing with schools and all of that as well. And you look at that and it's like, wow, that's not even a huge percentage. But for people to inherently make the assumption that there's more crime, that there is less educational opportunities, and so on and so forth, it's really a shame, because it's just a mental construct. It is not necessarily reality.
It's not. They've done studies. It's not true. It's just the fear, right? And we just had, I mean, I don't want to throw too many politics into it, but Trump just changed the whole concept of like low-income housing.
With what?
He said we don't want low-income housing in the suburbs. He just came out to change it. So Obama created a new law, I think in his first term, about certain neighborhoods you had to have, I think they call it 40B. Certain towns, that's the law, 40B. Certain towns have to have a percentage of homes that are affordable. So they call it low income. It's not low income. What it is it has to be a certain percentage under the average sale of the homes in your community. So if the average homes in your community are $350,000, you have to put homes that are out there for like $250,000.
Right.
And it has to be a certain percentage of homes in the community, so that it can bring in people that can't afford to live in the wealthier suburbs, white suburbs.
It's happening in downtown Nashville, in the city, so badly, this gentrification of downtown.
Right.
It is super expensive. We bought our place when the market was crashed 11, 12 years ago, and we were lucky to get in when we did, but our place has more than doubled in these last 12 years. And actually it doubled probably maybe 6 or 7 years in. So that's pretty amazing.
That is
that happen. Yeah, for a home.
Right. And so Trump he's trying to change that law and get rid of it. So of course the ACLU is suing him because it's completely right. But it's just that mentality. And his whole thing is, we don't want to lower the property values. So he's like pandering, right? Like, we're going to keep your home values where they belong, which is basically saying we're going to keep your neighborhoods white, right? Now, he's not going to come out and say that, and his people are all going to say he's not a racist. But it's absolutely racist, that behavior. And we can go back and forth about good binary, bad binary. I happen to think he's truly like as far racist as there can be, and he just knows the right terms to use so that he can get away with it. But you know, when David Duke is like a huge supporter of yours, I believe that he's a racist. So,
Yeah.
you know, just very fine people. So, I just think we can start to see all that and notice it in ourselves. Like I live in a predominantly white community, so I'm married with no kids. I don't care what the school system is. It has no relevance to me. And yet I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, so why wouldn't I live in one, right? That's what I'm comfortable with. So I'm not surprised that this is what I've chosen. Every now and then I'm like, oh man, I should really sell and move somewhere else, right? Like it's in my head now, like, wow, I'm in a white community because that's where I'm comfortable.
One of our viewers, Lauren, said, the area I lived in Chicago is the most ethnically diverse area in the U.S. with over 70 languages spoken. I lived there 4 years and already saw major gentrification changes in that 4 years. Gentrification is very bad in Chicago. But now she is in the whitest and most affluent city in the Midwest. So what was the area before, Lauren, where you were? Just comment whenever you get a second. It'd be interesting to know. One of the things before we move on from chapter 5, I wanted to bring up the fact that it was a teacher or some sort of school person in Virginia back when Trump was elected, and she said that she was glad that we didn't have an ape in heels
Yes.
as the first lady, and that we would have this, you know, fine woman or whatever, Melania Trump. And the mayor of the city in Virginia even responded like with affirmation to what the woman said. Her name was Taylor, something Taylor. Now, she ended up being suspended from her job, but she ended up getting her job back. And she went on to say, oh, I wasn't being racist. And it was like, how could you not even think that calling Michelle Obama an ape in heels is not the most racist thing you could possibly depict in your description? It was a little crazy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was also going to mention there was it in chapter 5? I thought that it was a really great analogy that they used about the pier stretching out over the water. You remember that? That was such a good analogy.
Could you remind me of what that was? I remember listening when I was walking, but I might have been distracted in that moment.
No, that's all right. It was in the book, it was on page 78. It was talking about the top of the pier. The part we can see signifies the surface aspect of, thoughts and this whole system, right? And then it talks about it's propped up while the pier seems to float effortlessly. It's propped up by a structure submerged underwater. The pier rests on pillars embedded in the ocean floor. In the same way a pier sits on submerged pillars not immediately visible, the beliefs supporting our racial claims are hidden from our view. To topple the pier, we need to access and uproot the pillars. And I was just like, that was such a great visual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And think how hard that is.
Right.
Under the ocean to dig up something.
If you watch her, I think it's like 18 minutes long. She does a talk. It's not exactly a TED Talk, but it's kind of like that. And if you look her up, if you Google on YouTube, if you look up on YouTube, Robin DiAngelo, she has like an 18-minute talk. She has a bunch of long ones, but that 18-minute one, part of that, she has a PowerPoint of the pier.
Wow.
It goes into more detail about each of the pillars and what they and how they affect everything. So I highly recommend it. I'm going to be doing a TED Talk on the 20th at our church, and we're gonna use that video again as a sort of a launching point to push the book for our church to read.
Nice. That'll be good. I hope you record some of that if you can. Lauren said it was Albany Park neighborhood in Chicago. That was the diverse neighborhood where she lived, where there were over 70 languages, which that would be such music to my ears. I love languages. Now I'm in Naperville, a suburb, only moved because of her job and does not like living there. A little too white for her. So I get that. I like diverse neighborhoods too. The food is better, and I think it's pretty nice. Anything else that anybody wanted to mention about the good, bad, binary situation?
Well, for me, I think it gave me the ability to notice where I'm being racist, and being able to say, yeah, I am racist, without it being like I'm evil. Like yeah. It gave me permission to own that I benefit hugely from white supremacy, and that I have some biases that some I'm aware of, but some I'm not. And I always want to be called out. If I'm, by either my friends or somebody. I hope that the people of color that are in my life can feel like they can call me out if I say something or do something that is inappropriate. And I try and talk to them about it and say, if I do, I want you to tell me. And I know it's not really fair to them to make them be the police, but I won't know if I'm doing something wrong if I'm not told, if it's like completely, like if I'm oblivious.
Right.
So I do need that. And I think asking, and letting your friends know that, and letting the people in your life, your coworkers, even if they're not necessarily your friends, your coworkers know, you know what, I'm doing my best, but I'm going to make mistakes. Yeah. And I need you to tell me when I do. Well, and I think that whole concept of good, non-binary, good binary, bad binary, sort of gave me more of the ability to own that than just you're a racist, A equals awful, compared to, I just have a boatload of biases that some I know of, some I'm completely oblivious to.
Well, what I would also say too that I thought was interesting about the good, bad binary is when we have groups like this where we're trying to have these dialogues, dismantling that binary, I think can actually, once you get the comfort level, which I don't even know if I'm there yet myself, but you can use that and as your segue into talking to others.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because you can sit there and say, hey, look, you know what? I'm saying this to you because I have these issues too. And this is what this taught me.
Right.
What do you think? Can you see that? And it can kind of, it's like, it's a great segue. Because I was like, wow, if you can own it yourself, you can talk to others.
Right. Especially if you have, like, for me, like a lot of my friends, right? Like we're very similar, right? Like we're white. Almost all of my friends live in predominantly white neighborhoods. I mean, most of my friends have kids. I'm the only one who doesn't. So, finding a good school was important to them, and so being able to talk about that and say how that term good school is really it's an underneath pillar. It's a pillar that's like it's propping up the
another systemic racial construct of some sort.
Yeah. And not realizing it. I don't think, my friends are, pretty, I think pretty open-hearted, good people. And I think they didn't realize it either. I think they're getting to now. But being able to have those conversations is really nice, to be able to say, wow, I never put two and two together like that. Like how that's a benefit for me that somebody else doesn't get to say, oh, I want my kid to go to school in a good neighborhood. Because if 8 families move into that neighborhood, all the white people move out anyway.
Yeah.
Which is just, to me, absurd. But I don't know.
Lisa, where did you grow up? I'm going to unmute you. Make sure it's not unmuting. Hold on. Okay, there it goes. You muted again. Oh, there it goes.
There we go. I grew up. Okay, so I grew up about 90 miles northeast of here in a little town called Livingston, Tennessee. Not a lot of diverse. Tiny little town.
I don't even know where that is. What's it close to?
Do you know where Cookeville is?
Oh, yeah. Is it north of there?
Cookeville.
Yeah.
Yep. It's about halfway between Nashville and Knoxville.
Okay. So I'm sure you grew up similar to how
But
I
I've
did.
been since 87.
Mm-hmm. In Nashville?
Yeah, I think there was a lot more diversity where you grew up, though. I mean, yeah, where you grew up, because when I was in high school, there were 2 people of color.
That's it? Wow.
And they were brother and sister. That was it. That was it.
Wow. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my school was probably half and half.
Yeah.
Maybe 40.
I didn't have a black kid in my high school till my junior year. I was the only Jewish person, and then in my junior year, a black family moved in.
Really?
And I went to a regional school, so I had 3 towns. 3 towns, and there's still 1 black family, 1 Jewish family.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, you know, my peculiar experience was the background is my parents paid for me to go to the private school education. So it was all predominantly white. Or there might have been 1 or 2 Jewish people. Then there was like a handful over my whole 12 years of education, a handful of black students. But then where I was raised, I was the minority. So that was just an interesting day to day. The juxtaposition it was amazing. There's that phrase that was used. I didn't know that I did it until I was in an adult life. I didn't know what it was called, but you've heard the phrase of code switching.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that I was doing that.
Oh,
yeah,
you did it.
Until because you just learned when you were in certain. And there was a funny time. I was in my mid-20s and I was in a professional job, admin, and even then I didn't know that's what it was called. But what had happened was one of my friends from a different circle had called, and I was on the phone with them. And then the phone call, I had to put them on hold because a customer had come up. You know, you're talking a high-end CEO type of person that I had to help with. And then they left, and then I picked up the phone call. And one of my colleagues was watching me, and they said, what did I just see? And just I realized it wasn't until later on in life. I was like, oh, that's code switching. You know, I thought it was speaking in the idiom of others, but okay.
I do it when I go overseas or when I'm with a bunch of people that are not Southern.
I do. Yeah. It's
in my own way, in my own weird way.
It's a different. It is different languages. You know, I figure oh, yeah. In social work, it was speaking in the idiom of others, but I've learned the other term code switching too.
Code switching,
yeah.
Well, I wanted to go a little bit into some of the notes I took on.
I'd never heard that term, but that's exactly it.
Lisa, oh, okay. You'd never heard code switching? Yeah. I heard a lecture maybe a month or 6 weeks ago. There was a group, there were a couple ladies that were talking all about it and brought in a speaker, and she talked more about it. It was really interesting. Okay, let me mute again just to make sure there's no echoing. Okay, so going into chapter 6, the first thing that she talked about was anti-blackness. The way that, I'm not sure if my notes necessarily define this, but I just took notes when I was walking. I go out and I walk, I put my headphones on, I listen to the book, and then I'll stop and take notes. And I'm sure people look at me like I'm crazy because I'll even be jogging, and then all of a sudden I'll just stop cold in my tracks and take notes in my phone so that I have something to mention when we get together. But I wrote, white people as a group must be discussed as far as grouping us together, no matter how uncomfortable that may feel, because we're so individualistic, especially in this country. This interrupts individualism. It takes individual blame from a person, and that makes it easier to actually talk about from that whole white group perspective. But then it also groups us together, which can also offend people. So it has the opposite effect, so that they will then deny that racism even exists because they don't want to associate themselves individually with racism. So they don't want to say white people as a group are racist. And then that makes it more difficult to actually discuss the whole systemic part of it. Messages are different when you're talking about different ethnic groups, Native Americans versus Asians versus Black or white. Even when you're talking about Japanese or Chinese people, whenever someone is brought up or a story is brought up and one of these ethnic groups is mentioned, if we don't immediately have some sort of stereotype going through our mind at that moment, then I think we're denying that that's happening, because most people will have some sort of preconceived notion about every group. And I think that that's true. Do you agree with that? You can unmute if you're just click the little button.
Can you repeat that last question? I'm sorry.
I was saying that whenever you think about, like, if you hear a story about somebody's Japanese or Japanese people or Chinese people or Black people or Asians or Native Americans, is there some sort of stereotype that comes up in your mind, no matter what you do to try to say that it doesn't? Do you admit that that actually does happen?
Yeah, I do now. I didn't before.
And that was your white fragility, right?
Right. Yeah, because it's awful to, like, it's really hard to admit that you have all these biases. Like, it's not like fun. Like, oh, here I am. I have a million biases, but I don't know any other way to heal them than to admit that I have them, right? Like, pretending that they don't exist is not going to make them go away.
No, you can't.
So I better own them.
Yeah, if you don't own it, you can't examine it.
Right. And go ahead, Elaine.
No, I was going to say too that, the bias can also be on the flip side, but it's still a bias. Like, I knew coming up with my first encounters, friends with a Vietnamese. Jesus, is it safe to just say Asian? Because I'm not sure which country.
It was Oriental back in the day was the offensive.
Okay. And so I had, but I always saw them as being super duper smart, but that's still a bias.
Yes.
I mean, but you know what my experience was, it was true. They were all just super smart. And the ones that all I met were all really good in math, but that's still a bias.
Yeah.
Right. It still is. But yeah.
Well, and it's that assumption, right? Because then imagine what it must be like
if you're not
for the Asian kid who struggles with math,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, because I'm Jewish, right? And I grew up pretty poor, and
so wait, Jewish are supposed to. The stereotype with Jewish are that you're
rich.
Gotcha.
Money. Yeah.
So, I didn't have that, right? So I was like always being told by people, well, you don't act Jewish.
Oh.
So
wow.
I didn't look it and I didn't act it. It was great. It was a great childhood. So so I know. So for me, I know that I still carry stuff from those experiences. Like, I still carry some level of internal trauma, not like physical trauma, but like my reaction to certain things, I definitely know I have from those experiences in my high school years. So it's a great reminder to me because it was a limited thing and no one needed to know I was Jewish. Like if I didn't tell somebody, they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
People of color never have that option. So the things that screw me up, my trauma, my issues, if you will, that I still work through, I'm like, this whole idea of like anti-Blackness, I cannot even imagine what it is like to carry that with you all the time, wherever you go, to be assumed that you're not a good person, to assume that you're a criminal, to assume that you're not a good student, to all the negative things, right? To assume you don't come from a family, right? Like a mother and a father, right? That your family's broken. Like all the things that, you know, that are involved with that. I cannot imagine how they carry it. Like I'm always amazed at, you know, how well they actually carry it and how they don't just beat the crap out of every white person that exists. Because I mean, we've done a job on them, and the traumas that they carry and the family history, right, that we don't talk about. Like, you know, we complain about the Black father not being there when, you know, for 160 years or 200 years, they killed the Black father, or they dragged the wife away, raped her, separated the kids from the families, right? So they have this huge trauma history, and then they expect them to figure it all out in, you know, what?
Just be okay.
Like, why haven't you figured it out? And they were still
because we have a Black president. We had a Black president, so there it's fixed.
So
yeah, and that makes me angry too.
Even in the 50s and 60s, right? I mean, they were still lynching people, for God's sakes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's happening today.
Right.
What's going on with these lynchings that have happened around the country in the last couple of months?
Yeah, they keep saying it's a suicide. I'm not buying it.
I'm not either, because there's never a camera. And all these places outside of these businesses, and there's never a camera, not even seeing a car go by, nothing. I mean, it just doesn't.
I never heard about it until everything started coming up. And all of a sudden it was like six young men in what, like a 2-month period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's not good.
And
I mean, that's legit. Like that's not that the other ones aren't lynchings, but shooting, listen, armory in, was that Georgia? That they shot him dead jogging down the street. That's just another term for lynching, right? I mean,
yeah, it was. And going back like to the beginning of the book, she mentioned as well in the history was that basically after slavery, that the depiction of the Black man was that he was dangerous and that he was going to hurt your white women. And in reality, that's not really the case. I mean, these people are human beings, and they're going to be naturally not dangerous people. That is a learned behavior. That is something that comes out of trauma, that comes from, you know, deep psychological abuse. And those are the types of prejudices that we have in our brains that create this construct of inferiority of a race, which then in turn gives the other race this superiority, which is where you get white supremacy from.
Right. Well, and not only that, but like the truth is, it was white men who raped Black women.
Total projection.
Yeah. It was a total projection. It was white people that destroyed Black people's lives. It was white people who killed them. It was white people who took away their children. It was white people who enslaved them. It was white people who held them back and wouldn't let them get educated. It was white people that said,
it was white people who were lazy and who profited off of the backs of folks who were really hardworking.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then once slavery ended, all of a sudden the Black person was lazy.
Yeah. And right? I'm like, Working
when
sun up to sundown for you.
right, because you wouldn't work for free anymore. Now you're lazy, and it's progressed. I mean, we're doing the same thing, right? We're seeing it spread out a little more over races now, right? With the wealthy now will blame everyone that's working class, like no one should make a living. You're just being lazy. Before it was like you should work 40 hours. Now it's like that's not enough. You need to work 2 jobs. So you're seeing the same thing, right? They're just pulling it out a little further, but the whole basis of it. But they're still separating, right? Because you're still hearing like, well, if the Black people and the Mexican people and those people weren't here taking your jobs, you could make more money, right? But I'm like,
no damn white person would want to do those jobs.
I'm pretty sure, right? But well, and I'll tell you, I work in a hospital, and the people that I work with, they're all, I shouldn't say they're all, but a lot of the women that I work with are immigrants, right? They're over here. I don't even know if they're U.S. citizens or not. I don't even care. They all work a boatload more than any Americans that are working there.
Yeah.
The U.S. citizens, white girls, they all work way more. Way more. Like ridiculous, and they're all like, when I stay late, they're like, oh, good for you. They're like, so like the difference in the work ethic, it's just, and so I always laugh because most of them are from different African countries. And I'm like, so to hear people, and I'm sure you guys have experienced the same thing. The people went, the wages aren't great. They work tons of jobs. They all own their own homes. They've busted their asses. So it's fascinating that people will then say, oh, they're lazy. If they start to complain and say, I want better benefits, it's like, how many hours do you want somebody to work so that they can put away money into their retirement? Like, how many hours is going to be acceptable? And this whole idea that you have to go to school and get a better paying job, it's like, well, somebody still has to do that job.
Yeah.
So this whole idea that everybody's supposed to like work for themselves or be so educated, because at some point it's like, well, then nobody's going to be able to do all the jobs that need to get done. Right? Like, who's going to work? Who's going to clean the hospital floors? If you tell them that they have to get educated and you're not willing to pay them a living wage, you're not going to have somebody to keep the buildings clean anymore. You're not going to have someone to collect the trash anymore. Because if you pay them enough, you're not going to have any infrastructure in your whole country.
Well,
sorry.
Also putting up, well, no, I mean, that makes total sense, but we're also putting up all of these roadblocks that make it impossible, such as, white people will be addicted to opiates, and so we pity them and we put them in rehab. But a Black person is addicted to crack, then they go to jail for life.
Right.
I mean, come on, what's the difference?
There isn't one.
There's not a difference.
No, because it didn't have, when it became the white community, then it became a problem.
Yeah.
But even, we see that all the time. Like, I know my friend, he said when the opiates became really big and white people started dying, he's like, oh, good. And I was like, what? And he goes, but you guys didn't give a shit when it was us dying, so why should we care when it's you guys?
Who was that you're talking about?
When the opioids became real, like when heroin started coming out to the white neighborhoods.
Right.
My friend who's of color said,
oh, your friend. Okay, I missed that part.
Like, good. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, you didn't care when we were dying from crack. He goes, didn't care at all. Just wanted to put us in jail. He didn't care. We were just a bunch of druggies. He goes, I have not a drop of sympathy for any person who's addicted to any drug. He goes, any white person, too bad, so sad. See you on the flip side. He was just, and it took me back, like I was just like, how can you feel that way? And then again, it was like,
read more, learn more.
Like, let me back up and go, oh yeah, we were kind of jerks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Let me acknowledge that this is true so that I'm not, showing my white fragility in the situations. Right. I'm ignoring it and tamping it down as if it's not a racist thing.
Right.
Speaking of the flip side, I wanted to go into the blind side before we wrap up. That is the movie that was so popular with Sandra Bullock several years ago about, well, I don't remember Michael Oher was his name. He was the football player.
Yeah.
And basically, this is the whole discussion around white people being racially benevolent. It's never the other way around, that we're always the one, helping the Black person get a better life by going to the white schools, moving to the suburbs, getting into sports or graduating from here or there or doing whatever it is, getting these skills and so forth. And the whole movie was all about him being this charity case, and that there were no Black characters that went against any typical stereotypes. You've got the poor Black kid. He's a sports hero. He had a drug-addicted mother. He had siblings with different fathers. The gangs approached him. He was rescued by the white woman. White suburbia saves the day. They depicted him as being developmentally disabled in appearance, but and also being very passive, but and that he had a low IQ for learning, but a top IQ for protective instinct, which is not even something that exists.
It doesn't exist.
There's no tests for that.
It's crazy. No.
So anyway,
I watched the movie, and I remember, I'm not considering myself necessarily woke or whatever the term is now, but I remember when it was all the thing to watch, and I was like, I guess I just didn't have the articulate, the intellectual stuff, but it never sat well with me. I watched it. And I was
there's something about this. It's just so.
There's something, and then as I read this, I was like, oh, that was it. That was why.
Yeah. And then the younger brother, basically, what was he doing? The younger brother was negotiating his contract.
Yeah.
And he sat in the back like he couldn't understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a lot, like I watched the movie Hidden Figures, and I love that movie. I love the story. But it is like that same concept of, right, like the white man rescues a Black woman, right? Like he goes and knocks down the restroom sign and says there'll be no more of this, and it's like you start to watch all these movies and it's like, why is there always a white person rescuing them? Why is it happening? What are they doing? And that's why I like the movie. That's why I love the movie Django.
I've never seen that. I need to.
There's no white people rescuing them there.
No, but that was wow. Yeah.
You know what I think of, though? I think of The Secret Life of Bees. Do you remember that?
That was a good movie. You'd have to remind me more about the storyline, but I do remember that I liked that movie.
Well, there were these Black women that had the bee farm or the beekeeping. And then there was this white girl, and her father was abusive, and I think the mother had died. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she basically ran away, and went to live with the Black women who were running the bee farm, the beehives, and all of that. And it just makes me think of like these sweet mamas that she was rescued by, and they were the heroes of her life. It wasn't the other way around.
Yeah.
I like movies like that, where you've got some, you've got to show the humanity of both sides of the equation, and that it's not always about the white benevolence going on. It's not, Black people are not charity cases.
Right. Well, I think it's getting better, but I think I think the movie Harriet was really good that way.
Which one?
Harriet. So
I'm gonna have to write these down because I haven't seen either of these. Django and that's DJ something, right?
DiAngelo. Yeah, but that's not a real one. That's just a fictional.
No, that's okay.
But Harriet is the story of Harriet Tubman. I thought that was really good.
Okay, I'll have to
But
look.
And Django is very Django.
it's violent.
Tarantino.
Yeah, it's a Tarantino movie.
Okay, but I'll wait.
I think it's better. I watched 12 Years a Slave. That movie was devastating.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
That's awful. Like awful because it's real. That's based on a real story.
Do you remember Amistad was troubling?
Yeah, and I never saw that one.
Oh, see, Amistad, but I'm sure 12 Years a Slave. Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to escape or trying to
They've been here, so I'm gonna
live in a bubble. But
12 Years a Slave. I don't want to forget these, and I'm putting them in the comments. Huh? Oh, YouTube rejected my comment. I don't care. Django, 12 Years a Slave, and Harriet. And what was the other one you said?
Oh, it was the Amistad? I don't know if you saw Amistad.
Yeah.
I remember when that came out. That came out a long time ago, didn't it?
Yes. It was, I think it was probably closer to that groundbreaking time period when and you know, I talked in some earlier episodes where I said I'm one that I don't try to draw attention to myself, but I'm a crier. And I believe that I saw that in the movie theater, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Oh.
I was in I wasn't ready. And I don't know that anybody was watching me, but I felt I was like in this fetal position. So I have to brace myself now when there's other things I have to do away.
And sometimes I think to be able to say that, you know, like, I mean, it's a good reminder that we have the opportunity to do it when we're capable of handling it. Where people of color, you know, that's another one of our benefits of white supremacy is like, if it's too much for us, we just shut it off and don't pay attention to it right now because it's too much.
Yeah, we can just close the door. Close the door, leave the door.
So it's a really, I mean, I think it's okay, but I think that we, you know, because I've done the same thing, and then I have to like remind myself, I'm like, oh, isn't that nice that I can just turn it off because it's too upsetting right now.
Yeah. Well, and also, like I said, the other thing too is what goes on in my head is I'm like, if I'm troubled in the moment, I'm not trying to center it about me. And like, if I'm sitting here in a movie theater, bawling my eyes out, then I'm taken away from the other folks that are trying to I'm like, so I just have to calm my tits and just walk away and just let me watch it. So not drawing attention to myself. That's the other thing too, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But it is, I mean, we do that. And I have the book open and I just want to touch base about this other comment that people make. And I know I heard it a lot when the football players started taking a knee. And
I had the notes on that too.
People said, you know, they're so ungrateful, but they should, you know, they're so ungrateful. They're making a good living. They look at them and like they're doing them a favor by allowing them to make a good living, and they should be grateful and therefore never say a word about any police brutality or any injustices because they're making a good living. And how dare they not be grateful to, I don't know, the white man for allowing them to make
the opportunity.
Yeah. So I just, because that one, I remember when it was going on and I was like, are you friggin' kidding me that you would even say, do they not even hear how awful that sounds? But it's that whole binary, right? The good binary.
The good, bad binary and the shame in admitting that there's a problem.
Like you don't even realize that you're saying they should be grateful. So white people never, you know, and I know this goes back to earlier, I think we never put ourselves in a group. Everyone is something else from our perspective.
No, we don't.
It's them, they, right? The Asians, the blacks, the this, the that. It's never the whites. We don't exist as a race. Like we don't like it when people say white people are prejudiced, right? Like white people get up in arms and go, don't generalize. And yet we do it for every other race.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody turns the tables on us, we like lose our mind.
Well,
look at the whole idea about Karens.
Yeah, Karens.
Oh, I've heard a lot from white women about the Karen. They are not
They want to
happy.
call it a racial slur, or I don't know if that's the term that they used, but I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they broke it down what it stands
Wow.
for. KAREN. I can't remember what they said it was, but
What does it stand for?
it's basically like you're calling out the people of color. It's like, I can't remember what it's. I'll have to Google. Hold on. But I saw it written out, and I was like, oh, that's really accurate.
Funny. Just an acronym or something, the Karen.
Yeah. That's what Karen means.
While you're looking that up, I want to go ahead and kind of wrap up the discussion for today. And also mention that, again, that we'll do this 2 more times to do the next 4 chapters and then the last 2 chapters and the end notes in 2 more discussions coming up. And we've been putting about a 2-week break in between just because life. And then after that, we don't have anything on the agenda yet, but I was going to try to open this up to you guys and say who wants to make a decision and kind of lead something for, discussion. Sorry, it's echoing again. So you guys think about that, and I'll obviously mention that in the group as well to see if anybody wants to step up and kind of lead something, and maybe Lauren can join us another time in the audience. Lauren had posted a class that's being taught online for some.
Akron, Ohio, the Akron, Ohio University. I saw that. That looked kind of
cool. I don't know if I can commit to that personally, but it doesn't mean that we can't have that be a project that's led by somebody in the group. Do you see it yet, Lori?
No, but I found another thing that in San Francisco called the Karen Act. They're trying to create, and it stands for Caution Against Racially Exploitive Non-Emergencies Act.
It's like, don't be calling the manager about everything.
Right, don't call the police for. But I saw something and it was very accurate, but I can't.
Caution with a K.
That's hilarious.
Okay.
It did make me laugh, though, when I read it. I was like, oh.
All right. Well, if there's anybody else got anything you want to say, otherwise we can just wrap up and we'll schedule another one coming up.
Yeah, I'm bumming I can't find what it.
Well, when you find it, put it on the Shout Your Cause, maybe.
Oh, okay, I will.
Share it with all of us.
I will. Because I'm like, damn it. I found it. Like, I saw it. It was just some blip I came across. I don't know if it was real, but it was like, oh, yeah.
Probably pretty clever.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And I really appreciate you being here and having these discussions. I'm going to get all of these in a blog post for the entire book series. So we'll have it. And I've been keeping my notes and we'll, do all of that. So, and that hopefully will give you some things to draw on as well, Lori, when you lead this in your church. I'm so glad that you've been able to do this with us so far.
Oh, I'm excited too.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a good week.
Bye, you too.
Bye.